I'm Karen Huss again. Now I'm going to talk to you about the land use and transportation section and how we do or expect to see air quality analysis or assessments. There's a lot of really good information out that we provide for resources or guidance. I mean, you can always call us up or email us, but we do have guidance documents that should keep you from having to call us for the most part. And the Guide to Air Quality Assessment in Sacramento County is our document. It's on our website, and it's pretty detailed. Sometimes I get questions about the document and how it's written, but at least I know people are looking at it, so that's good. The California Air Resources Board also has an air quality and land use handbook, which, although when it first came out, we thought, oh, what a pain, and this is not helpful at all. But it can be helpful when you're doing a review if you're trying to permit a facility like a chrome plate or something, or if you're looking at that, and it gives some good buffer distances from sensitive receptors. So in that respect, it can be a helpful thing as far as land use and citing land use problems. CAPCOA is the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association. So all 35 air districts in the state, they have an organization, and they look to do things consistently or put consistent guidance out statewide. And there's a couple of really good documents that we use in the land use section, which is quantifying greenhouse gas mitigation measures. It's a really detailed document on doing emission calculations and for greenhouse gases. And then there's a health risk assessment for proposed land use projects. And I don't know if you guys would be using that much. I know OEHA has some other health risk assessment guidance, but I think they are compatible. But CAPCO has those documents on their website. That's what these documents look like. Right. So the pollutants that we expect to see in an air quality analysis are the ozone precursors, which you've heard from Ali already, NOx and VOC, or sometimes we call it ROGs. Used to be a difference between them, but now they're the same, considered the same pollutants. Particulate matter, toxics, diesel PM, asbestos, either in soil or in demolition projects, and there's a lot of other toxics that you saw listed that Ali had. Carbon monoxide, although we're in attainment, sometimes there's hot spots created by projects of CO, so sometimes they need to be addressed or at least analyzed, and then greenhouse gases. On this slide, we provide a link to some maps on our website of areas in Sacramento County that are in naturally occurring asbestos areas. So if you're doing any soil movement or construction in those areas, you need to be paying attention to our regulations for that, dust control practices. The activities that we expect to be covered in an air quality analysis for construction type activities, we need to see emissions of on and off-road mobile exhaust, portable equipment exhaust, fugitive dust, and the activities that we usually see at construction sites are site prep, cut and fill, grading, demolition, paving, constructing buildings, and applying coatings. In the operation, which in my discussion with you today, it won't be so much operational stuff. Most of your operational stuff would have been covered by Ali's presentation as far as permitted sources, but we do, in addition to the permitted emissions, we often want to see in the analysis what are the on-road and off-road exhaust from people coming to work there or truck trips to and from a permitted facility. And then if there's a lot of combustion from other things besides a stationary source, space heating, well, that would probably be a stationary source. And kind of architectural coatings and stuff like that. There's a few modeling tools out there to help you with non-stationary source related emissions, and CaliMod is the newest analysis tool, and you can get it for free at calimod.com, and there's a lot of good user's guides and Q&As and all that kind of stuff available for free. Sacramento Air District has another tool which I think you'll find really handy and you may not have known about. It's called the Road Construction Emissions Model. Now, first of all, you would see, well, we're not building a road, so how would that apply to us? So it's a pretty good spreadsheet, and it's got some macros in it. It uses the same base data that CaliMod uses as far as MSAC and off-road emission factors that CARB puts out. And we apply it for linear projects, not just road construction, but like pipelines or levee work. And I'm going to propose that you guys maybe take a look at it for some of your site soil cleanup projects. You might find it easier to use than CaliMod. Sometimes people don't like to use modeling tools and they just want straight emission factors. You can usually get that from EPA on the AP42, which is what, air pollution. Do you guys use AP42? Yeah, a lot. So permitting people are probably familiar with it. The link's here. And then for dispersion model, the newest dispersion model is AirMod, and I think we're starting to use it more, but it takes time because dispersion modeling is very kind of complex, so it takes time to move from one to the other. Once you do your analysis of air emissions from your project, you have to look at determining if it's significant under SMAQMD. Our SMAQMD guidance provides some screening methods for construction. For NOx, because we want to look at NOx and PM for the most part in construction, if it's a 35-acre or less project and doesn't include these other bulleted items, generally you could say that you can screen out of significance for NOx. But it doesn't sound like DTSC's projects would typically screen out just because generally you're digging a lot of dirt and moving it out and bringing a lot of dirt in. So you're having haul truck activity, a lot of movement of material. You may have compact schedules where you're trying to dig and get it out quick, you know, so it may not, you may not be able to easily screen out for our NOx significance. For PM, you may be able to easier, you know, on some of these smaller projects. You know, if we assume if you're a 15-acre disturbed or less a day project and you put some basic emission control practices for dust, that you could say that your PM emissions would be less, or screen out would be less than significant under SMAQMD, under our screening criteria. I'm going to skip operational because it doesn't apply as much to the kind of project that you've given me to display, but it would still apply. Ali showed, you know, he showed the significant thresholds, but I don't think there's any way to really screen out of, you're not building a land use project like a housing development, or, you know, and that's usually what our screening applies to. So we do have, if you can't screen out, then you have to actually look at your emissions and apply them to our thresholds to see if you are significant or not. And Ali had showed you, and here it is again, your 85 pounds a day of NOx for construction, and then a draft greenhouse gas threshold of 1,100 metric tons a year. Operational 65 and 65 for NOx and ROG or VOC, and 1,100 metric tons a year for GHG. Now that is more of a land development one. Ali showed you a 10,000 metric ton for stationary sources. They are treated differently. They're just a whole different animal, building a housing project versus building a stationary source. They're highly scrutinized, stationary sources more so than land development projects. And then we have this catch-all that I think Ali alluded to, is that your other pollutants, not NOx or ROG or VOC or greenhouse gas, if you exceed the California ambient air quality standards, or if we're in a non-attainment area, if you contribute 5% or more towards that non-attainment, then you would be considered significant. And that, for us in the land use world, is mainly looking at PM. So if you don't screen out for PM, then you may have to do some dispersion modeling to show that your PM isn't contributing 5% towards the non-attainment of the California ambient air quality standard. And that's the only way you can get from a pounds per day of PM to micrograms per cubic meter in the air, is doing dispersion modeling. We don't like to push people into dispersion modeling if we don't have to for a SMAQMD analysis, unless it's a stationary source. You saw this table already. This is our significance table. We want people to use it before it's adopted, because if we take it to our board and say, here's the thresholds we propose, people are already using it, it's a lot easier to get the board to adopt something if it's already being used in practice. Okay, if you determine your project is significant for air quality impacts, then we definitely focus on mitigation and getting them under those levels. For construction, we have some basic practices, and we have more enhanced or advanced exhaust control and enhanced fugitive dust control. And then mitigation fees might come into play if you can't get your NOx down below the 85 pounds a day threshold. And for operational, it's a little bit different. You know, if you had a plan that you had to do operational mitigation and you were land development, we'd ask you to actually do a plan where you showed about 15% reduction of your emissions. And then for permitting, we already talked about BACT and toxic BACT. And then we always want you to include the mitigation in your approval documents or in a mitigation monitoring plan to make sure it actually happens. I'm not going to go through all these, but I did want to give you an idea of what the construction and control practices look like. Basic ones include some very, very basic dust control about, watering exposed surfaces, covering or tarping your loads or leaving a freeboard on your loads when you're hauling, wet power vac or sweeping the streets to keep, dust from being just kicked up and up and up on the streets and vehicle speeds. Making sure that the equipment is meeting the idling, the 5-minute idling required by CARB, and then maintaining your equipment that it's working properly, so you're not having all those visible emissions come out. The enhanced ones for fugitive dust, it's just a little bit more to do. We don't focus as much on dust control because we do have prohibitory rules, so our staff can go out, and if you're not doing a good job with dust control, they can write you a ticket on the spot. So let you know that these are the things you can do, but our rule doesn't prescribe exactly how you control dust, but it says you take reasonable precautions, so you do everything you need to with the conditions at the site. Enhanced exhaust control is showing that you have a cleaner construction fleet on the site, and it involves showing us an equipment list of what you're going to be using out there, showing that the NOx reduction compared to a fleet average. A statewide fleet average is 20% cleaner NOx, 45% cleaner for PM, and we have a pretty good program. We work real well with contractors getting their information to us, showing that they need the reduction, and monthly reporting to make sure that their fleet continues to be a clean fleet working on the project. And we think it's pretty effective. We've had contractors call us and say, we don't have to do this in any other air district in the state. And they say, we bring our cleanest equipment to Sacramento County. So that's, we feel pretty good about that. Sure.
What do they consider clean equipment?
Basic
year?
Well, model year usually will tell you what the engine emissions level is certified at. So we usually don't see very much Tier 0 engines, so those are really old equipment. But we give them flexibility because it's a fleet average. So you might need a specialized Tier 0 piece of equipment, but as long as you have some Tier 3 and Tier 4 equipment, your average is probably going to meet the requirement. I think more and more the fleets will have a harder time meeting the PM reduction, just because over time the fleets are going to get cleaner naturally. So to ask them to get 45% cleaner, if you have all Tier 4 engines, you may not be able to get 45% cleaner than the state fleet average because the fleet average gets cleaner over time. If that makes sense.
I should throw in here, Tier 0 is engines built in 1995 or older. So okay. That's when the federal standards kicked in for various size categories of engines.
Right.
And we're just getting into interim Tier 4 and Tier 4 engines right now for almost all categories.
Exactly. All right, then there's 2 tools that we want to show you a little bit more how to use. So we'll move into that. And I do have both the tools here that we can go through, but I want to go through some screenshots first just to demonstrate and make some points. And then if we have time and we can show you actually how to work them right here on the computer. So I asked for some project information, or as provided from OPIA, is it OPIA? How do you guys say OPIA staff? And these were used in some previous trainings with other air districts. And looking at you have 3 phases of mass grading, so this is a soil cleanup project. And although, there's some truck trip information, and these are for different air districts, so ours wasn't on here, so I just kind of took some and created some modeling runs. And I'm going to focus more, when I use the road construction emissions model, even though I ran 3 different runs, one for each of the phases, I'm only going to show you phase 2 because that's the most emissive phase, so I wanted to show you that one. And CaliMod, you can put all 3 of them in one model run. So first I want to show you the road construction emissions model because I think it's the easier one and you may want to try it out. So these yellow areas, they are on the data entry tab, and if you fill out all these, you can get emission calculations just from this data. but I'm going to suggest that you go down farther in the data entry page because there's a lot of blue cells that you can make it more project specific. So you'll even get a better emissions analysis from it. So you put in your construction start year, your title of your project. You can leave the project type as a new road construction because pretty much just picking these project types will pick a little bit different equipment down below, but you're going to have to put in your own equipment. You're not going to want to use the default equipment in this model because it is for more road building and road widening and bridge work. You put in your construction timeline, and for the second phase, it was, I think it was 35 days. So basically I put in 35 divided by 22 because 22 is the days in a month in this model. So, so I just divided that out, so we have about 1.6 months. Depending on where you're working, you may want to pick different types of soil, sand and gravel, weathered rock, or blasted rock, and we have some guidance available on what would be the right ones to pick in Sacramento County. So if you guys do start using this model and you want that, just send me an email and we can get that to you. Project length, I'm going to leave it 0 because this isn't a road project, and pretty much when you have a mile for the road project down below in the equipment, it'll put in how many signal boards that you need for your project. And I don't know if you guys use signal boards out on the road for your projects when they're doing cleanup, but if they do, they can put one in, they can override. But right now I would suggest leaving it at 0. The project information said it was a 3-acre project, and if you don't know how many acres per day you're going to be working on the project, you can assume 1/4 of the project will be actively worked, and that's what this is, since I didn't know. And we always put, yes, we're using water trucks, because then it'll do some dust mitigation in the model. There's a very simplified fugitive dust calculation in here, and then saying that you have a water truck will give you a 50% reduction in the fugitive PM. Just off the bat. And then we put in, because I didn't know, so we just put in some 500 cubic yards a day would be exported, just so we can demonstrate the model, because I'm not exactly sure how much was going to be exported from this project. And and even one more detail, if you know the truck capacity that's hauling the soil, then you can put that in there, otherwise just put in 20 cubic yards. Okay, going farther down in the spreadsheet, the data tab, all these blue or light blue colors are where you can make the project or the model more yours. So I'm going to zero out all the there's 4 phases of construction in this model, and I'm going to zero out all the phases but grading and excavation and put the whole 35 days or 1.59 months into that phase. So we have one phase. So you want to make sure that the totals on the bottom match or the model won't work right. Excuse me. Another thing about grading and excavation, the model puts any soil hauling emissions into that phase when it summarizes the emissions. So that's another reason why you would want to use that phase if you have a lot of soil hauling happening in your project. Scrolling down farther in the data entry page, there's a place for soil hauling emissions. And you need to and it calculates vehicle miles traveled per day, so it can estimate the mobile emissions from all the truck trips. So you need to make sure that that it matches the cubic yards you put in up top. If you don't do any of the blue overriding, you'll see that it's assuming 30 miles of round trip for each haul, and then because we put in 500 cubic yards a day, it was going to assume 25 round trips would be needed that day, and it gave you 1,250. Actually, I overrode the miles because I wanted to match the project data that you guys had given. In that phase, you wrote 1,200 vehicle miles traveled. So I got pretty close at 1,250.
So does it matter if those vehicle miles are going outside of the Sacramento Air District?
Basically, here you want to capture the total trip here. But yes, it does. When you're looking at determining significance later, you can say, okay, only half of those were in Sacramento County, so you apply half of the emissions to our threshold to determine significance. Then the other half, you're going to have to go to that county air district, maybe it's El Dorado County or Amador or whatever, and you're going to have to look and see if they have thresholds and say, okay, well, this is 25 pounds a day of NOx from these emissions in El Dorado County, and maybe their threshold is 20, so you're over their threshold. So yes, you split them up when you're applying thresholds to them based on the percent or the miles or whatever. And you can do 2 runs. If you want to do those vehicle miles in Sacramento and run it here, and then run a separate one and say these are the vehicle miles in El Dorado County, you can do that too. As long as you document what you're doing in your analysis, I think you can go either way as long as you make good documentation of the analysis. You would scroll down farther in that same data tab in the model, and if you had more water trucks, you could put that in there. It does an assumption of how many miles the water truck is going to go on the site. You can always override the default of that, and it's just basically here capturing exhaust emissions from the water truck on site. And then, like I was telling you before, there's a fugitive dust component, real simplified, and because you're using water trucks, it's going to take half of that and mitigate it. Down farther in the same emission tab, it has a list of equipment, all the off-road types of equipment that are available, and then it has a white row of default equipment that it would have picked for the data input that you put in up top. Now, like I was telling you before, for your projects, you're going to want to gather some data on your project up front. You don't necessarily have to know horsepower, model year, or exact equipment if it's a cat or a deer or whatever, or come on. So you don't need to know that. You just need to know kind of the equipment categories that are going to be used on the project and how many of them. So here you can override in the blue of anything that's over here in the white. Or if it's a 0, then you can just leave it as 0. So you guys had given 3 pieces of equipment for each phase. And that included 1 grader, which is here, there, and then 1, I think it may have been a loader or a dozer, but I left the loader in there because they're pretty similar pieces of equipment, and we see more rubber-tired loaders than dozers out there. No scrapers, no signal boards, and then this model had 2 tractor loader backhoes, and your list had 1. So we basically have 3 pieces of equipment here. Your initial list had a water truck too, but since we already have the water truck in a different part of the model, we didn't put it in here. So we have all 4 pieces of equipment that you had in your project description. On the right, which is not showing here because it would get too small for you to see, it's actually doing the emission calculations for each piece of equipment. So they are shown right there on the screen in pounds per day. And then I wanted to show you the summary tab from the work we just did, and it's showing 42 or 48 pounds a day of NOx from the actual off-road and the on-road haul trucks. And then it gives you a PM10 total, and it breaks it out by exhaust and fugitive dust, and then it does the same thing for 2.5. And then it has a CO2 pounds per day, which is part of the greenhouse gases, and then it does a ton per year also. So it says maximum pounds for the phase, and then it shows total tons a year for the project. And it shows 123.9 tons a year of CO2. Now, if you're going to be doing greenhouse gas analysis in this model, this is short tons, so you're going to have to multiply it by 0.91 to get metric tons. But it's pretty close. It gives you a ballpark. It shows that you're way under 1,100, our proposed GHG threshold for construction. And it also shows here that that phase, since this is the most emissive phase, it is below our 85 pounds a day of NOx threshold of significance. Okay, then I want to show you, before we go into the actual models itself, I wanted to go through some screenshots of CaliMod, just so weird things won't happen while we're just trying to show you the screens, and then we can actually run the model too, or show you the model itself. So this, like I was saying before, you can put all of your phases into CaliMod. You don't just do one at a time. So we did a test. You always want to pick Sacramento County if you're working in Sacramento County. For us, I mean, you can put in Sacramento Air District and it'll be the same, but you may be working in other air districts that have multiple counties, or you're in a county, like maybe you're working in San Joaquin County, but it's in the San Joaquin Valley Unified Air District. You probably would want to choose county too, but you're going to want to talk to those air districts, how they want you to run the model. Wind speed, precipitation, both of those are populated automatically based on the county information. You will have to pick climate zone to run this model, and the user's guide for CaliMod does have a lookup table, so if you have a zip code where your project's located, or if you have a city, you can look up either of those and figure out what climate zone. Because for Sacramento County, I think there's 4 options, but the most prominent one in Sacramento County is 6. You're going to want to take a look at where you're located in the county if you're in urban or rural area. We have some, you probably want to work with us on that. I mean, if you're in the urban core, which maybe be where a lot of your cleanup projects might be, you definitely can use the urban land use setting. But if you're way out in Rancho Marietta or way down in the southeast Sacramento County, you probably would want to pick rural because there's a little bit difference in the mobile emissions calculations that happen for that. And then pick the year that you're going to be doing the project. So for this one, we put 2015. You need to select the utility company. This isn't as important for construction type projects, you know, where soil dig, but the model has to have a choice here or it won't work. So Sacramento County is served by SMUD, so you would pick SMUD. So that's the first required data entry. The second one is picking a land use or the model won't work. And for a soil removal type project, there isn't really a great land use for it, so we're going to suggest use an industrial, user-defined industrial type. And then just put in one unit, and then the main thing you want to capture is the acreage that you're going to be working on. So you see that highlighted yellow 3, and that's what we put in because you're just doing a soil cleanup here. We didn't put any square footage in because we're just dealing with the soil. There's this button up top, and we should talk about that real quick. Maybe we could talk about it now. It's called Cascade Defaults. And when you're using the model, for the most part, you want to keep it checked until you get all your data input in. Now, if you go to the page app, or if you go to this page, the next page, which I'll show you, and you start putting information in, and then you said, oops, I want to change something back, you probably want to unclick that button because you don't, once you go back, the stuff you did in the previous page may go back to the default. So unless you want to pull your hair out and be frustrated the whole time while you're going from one page to another in CaliMod, you have to be real careful when you click and unclick this, this Cascade Defaults. So once you pass, let's see, I'll talk about it more as we go through. So this is the construction phase. This is where you put in each of the phases of your grading, and you can put in your start and end dates. You guys provided the total days of each phase at 25, 35, and 25, so I put that in. And you'll see the highlighting in yellow means, oh, this is not default information. So once you see yellow, it's going to require you to put something down in the remarks section just to describe why the default was overridden. So you can just put in, you know, your notes why you're picking the data, or this is the project timeline. And then you can go to the next. Once you get your dates of starting and ending of your grading phases, you can go to the next tab, which you'll actually put the equipment in. Now, CaliMod starts with the default amount of equipment, and it's very similar to the information that you guys provided, except for the excavator. So what I did here is I zeroed out the excavator. Instead of deleting the line altogether, it's better to zero it, because later if you open it back up, it'll probably bring that excavator back, because it's a very quirky program. So zeroing out stuff works better than deleting lines, especially in your equipment. So for the grading phase 1, we put in those 3 pieces of equipment and zeroed out the one that's not needed. And you can tab through, I didn't show all the tabs, but you'll tab through a screen that's similar to this for each of the 3 grading phases and do the same thing. Once you're done with that, you go to the dust from material movement, and you want to be able to put in the material amounts that you're importing or exporting. So being similar to the other model, we use 500 cubic yards a day of material being exported, and I showed the calculations down in my remarks section. 500 cubic yards for 25 days is 12,500 cubic yards exported, and so on for the other 2 phases. And then I put in that there was only 3 acres total disturbed, although you could have left it and it probably would have had a different number in it, because you assume over an 8-hour day, if there's a scraper there or a piece of equipment, that it's going to pass by that 3 acres more than once. So this model will actually add it up. If it went over 3 acres 5 times that day, it will show 15 acres there. So you can either leave it there or you could override it, whatever makes more sense to you guys. So once you have that in, you'll tab to the next. Actually, I skipped demolition because this one didn't have demolition. So I skipped the tab to trips and VMT, where you have each of the phases. You have an assumed 8 person coming to the site each day, and you can change that if you know better. Then it calculated the number of trips of hauling that cubic yards that we put in on the other screen. This model is assuming an 8 cubic yard truck. So if you know the cubic yards of the truck, you should modify those, because then you'll have less haul trips, because that'll impact your emissions a lot. It'll bring them down if you have a larger cubic yard, capacity. It's assuming your workers are coming 10 miles to the site. It doesn't show any vendors, because I'm not sure why it doesn't show vendors, but you probably don't have a lot of vendors coming to the site anyway, but if you know that, you can put them in. And it's assuming a 20-mile haul length. So if you know it's bigger than that, you want to change that as well. So after that screen, let's see, you'll be doing on-road fugitive dust, and it has, here it assumes that all the roads are paved. Now, if that's the case, you can leave it there. But if any of the haul trucks or the workers that are coming in, if the road is not paved, you might want to do a percentage here and show that some of it's not paved. So it'll bump up your fugitive dust calculation because you're having trips on unpaved. But I don't know that information, so I didn't do anything here. But you can note that you can do that. Okay, now right here, I skipped over to the mitigation screen. So right now would be a good time after you put all this data in to unclick. After you pass this, then you want to unclick the Cascade Defaults, because it'll freeze all that data entry where it was. Now, but it enables, after you've left that last screen, it enables the CaliMod to do all the calculations of emissions. So you want that to happen, but then it's a good time to unclick it. So if you go tab back, you won't change all that or the override and go back to default. So I want to show you this one page before we run a report, because you want to be able to capture some mitigation on your project. Some of the main things that we would ask you to do in the basic controls is that you would water exposed areas, so you're using your water truck twice a day, and that would give you a 55% reduction in PM, just in that part of the emissions. We would expect you to do unpaved roads by, that you would do a vehicle speed of 15 or less. So you put that in there, and that's going to give you some reduction of PM emissions. And that you clean off the paved roads each day, and that's going to give you an estimated 9% PM reduction. So those 3 data inputs are important to do to show the basic construction control practices that we suggest you do on all your projects. You can do, up here it shows your pieces of equipment that were in those other screens. It shows no excavators. Remember, that was a default piece of equipment, but since we left it 0, it's just going to show it here as 0, which is good. So it didn't do anything funky. And since you used 1 grader, 1 rubber-tired dozer, and 1 tractor loader backhoe for each phase, it's showing 3 pieces of each type of equipment. So this is all the equipment that the calculations are going to be done on. If you know that you're going to specify some emission reductions from these, we don't suggest you have to do it here, but if you want to see, oh, can I get my NOx below 85 if I require the project to use all Tier 3 engines or more? You can put that in here where it says engine tier. Where it says no change, you can put in Tier 3. If you're just curious and want to see what it'll do to the emissions, and if you want to put that mitigation requirement on your project, you can, even though we suggest more of a fleet average approach. It just gives contractors more flexibility. But you can do that, and you can look and see what it does to the emissions here on this screen. All right, then once you get through that and all that information, you want to run your reports. And we're going to suggest you run 2, 1 for summer and 1 for annual. Summer will give you pounds per day in construction, and we want you to be able to say, okay, this is the maximum pounds a day of NOx from our project, so you can compare it to our 85 pound a day threshold for NOx. The annual report we want you to run for greenhouse gases, because that'll give you metric tons of CO2e, and you can compare it to the 1100 draft threshold that we have. I didn't really talk about CO2e, but hopefully you guys are familiar with the lingo in climate change. It just takes, the CO and methane and, what is it, nitric. This is a snapshot of what the summer report would look like. And you can say it, you see the project name, and you see that it's run for Sacramento County, and this is a summer report, and it gives you the project characteristics that you put in. It shows the 1 user-defined unit of industrial at 3 acres, and it all that should look familiar to you. Then it shows any notes you put in. It'll put those into this report so people know exactly why you did what. And I'm not going to show you all. You might see up here it shows 12 pages, so we don't really want to see all 12 pages. But you want to probably see the first couple or 3. And I want to show you the emission summary. In NOx, it shows it's 46.67. And when I saw this and I compared it to the other model, I said, oh, it's almost right on. So it should give you some confidence using either of the models that you're going to get a pretty similar result as far as NOx goes. So we would want to see that in your reports that shows your NOx. And then mitigated, I put the mitigated construction in here too because you can see 7.39 pounds a day of fugitive PM10, and then you can see by putting in those mitigations that it dropped it down to 3.8. So you're getting about a 50%, 54% reduction or so. We didn't put anything in for NOx, so it's showing the same NOx on the top and the bottom. So I was going to give you another excerpt from the annual report. Now, all the stuff on top looks the same, and all the notes come over, just like in the summer report. But then in the construction emission summary, it has tons per year instead of pounds per day. And then here's the metric tons. It shows 253.9. And that's higher than the other model showed. I think the other model was in 100 and something. And a lot of that's probably because of how the haul trucks were portrayed in each model. Remember I showed you this one had 8 cubic yards, so you're going to have more trucks. So you're going to have more emissions. So I'm thinking that's the biggest driver in the difference here. But either way, they're both below the 1,100 metric ton draft threshold for construction. So this is a fairly small project, one that we wouldn't probably comment on if you sent it to us. Then I wanted to give you just a summary of the analysis after we did the demo. You know, both the projects, and I guess I already said this, they're below the 85. It's less than the PM screening level, because it's a 3-acre project, so you're less than 15 acres, and we assumed that you put the basic construction control practices, and we calculated those reductions in both models for PM, and then they're both less than 1,100 metric tons a year. You probably wouldn't get a comment letter from us on that, but we do like to remind you that we do have prohibitory rules that apply in the construction phase. That's really important to remember. Just because you're out of CEQA, you know, there's fugitive dust rules, there's permitting requirements. You may have a portable piece of equipment that comes to the site, you know, a generator or an air compressor, and those ones need to have permitting either with the state CARBS program or the local process. And you know, if you're in a naturally occurring asbestos area, there's rules that have to be complied with. So even when CEQA's done, there's still rules that have to be applied to the project. Okay, before we open the model, I want to make sure.
Where do you locate it?
Okay, well for CaliMod, you go to calimod.com, and there's no way you can't find it once you get there because it's a real simple website. The user's guide, so go to calimod.com. For the road construction emissions model, if you go to airquality.org, that's our website, and over on the right-hand side, there's some quick connects, you know, and it says CEQA tools. So if you click on CEQA tools, it'll take you to our CEQA page, where it has our CEQA guide, and it also has links to CaliMod, and then it has the road construction emissions model spreadsheet there that you can download.
You download the CaliMod. If you're working within Sacramento County, that would be noted in the first part where you put down the county you're working in.
When you download the model,
or after you download
the model, you would open up on that front page where you can select the county. Yeah, there's a drop down of all the counties. There's a drop down of all the air districts. You can even run something statewide if you want just statewide average emission factors.
Okay.
So it's really cool. Before, a lot of you may have used Urbamis before in the past, where when you downloaded Urbamis, you had to go and download the Sacramento data set or the San Joaquin data set. You don't have to do that with this model. And you guys already have it on some of your computers?
Just our 2 laptops,
Just your 2
that we're
laptops.
using for training today thus far.
Yeah. So
some of the regional folks have it loaded up.
if you haven't loaded it yet and you go to get it loaded, there are some, you know, system requirements. So if you load it and then things aren't working, go to the user's guide and there's a page that shows system requirements. I think the the .NET framework has to be a certain version, and then you have to have some sort of SQL. I mean, there's 2 components, so, and it's in the user's guide. So if you have problems, make sure that you install it the right way.
It might be best, if you would like to download the model, to give OEIM a call and get some advice from them before downloading it.
I have another question.
Okay.
Did Karen state earlier that you can use Kelly Mod or road construction model?
Yes. In Sacramento, you have the choice. And you could always call us up. I mean, I put on the screen Ollie's information, so if you have questions on permitting, you can call him or email him, and I put mine. So you can call me or email me, and if I'm not the right person, I mean, if your project's in an area that I'm not working in, I'll give you to another planner. But for the most part, we can talk about why one's better than the other, but we take both, yes.
Another question. For Southern California, do we have a choice of using one or the other?
You'll have to ask their district down there. We have had people from the Bay Area and San Joaquin call and ask us or ask us questions about the model, and so you have to work with each air district. My guess is if you're in the South Coast Air District, they're not going to want you to use the road construction emissions model, but you can ask them. But I think I'm getting the feel that people think that might be an easier way to go. And that's okay. I think that's why it's good to have those models, especially if it's a small project. You don't want to do a lot of work to show that you're less than significant. And the road construction emissions model is less, I guess it's less quirky.
Another question.
Okay.
Where do you look up climate zone?
Okay, on CaliMod.com's website, there should be an Excel spreadsheet there that has the climate zones. So just open that up, and then you can do a find search in Excel, and you can type in your zip code, or you can type in your city and look it up.
The project managers who run the Cali Mod for their projects, if they have the information readily available, how long should they plan for the model to take? How long does it take to run?
To run the model? It
Yes.
doesn't take that long to run
Okay.
the model. It's
So-
gotten a lot faster since the first version. When we first put it out as a beta test, people were going, we're not going to sit here and, we could go get a coffee, we can go talk to our boss, and it's still running. So, but the last update, they did a lot on the they improved the platform, so it really doesn't take that long. I mean, for me to do it, it probably took less than, a half hour from start to finish, making sure I gathered the right data and thinking about what you're putting in there and making sure it matches, and making sure the quirky things didn't happen, because sometimes that happens, you have to start all over.
So that's probably the key right there, is to think about what you're going to put in before you start putting in the data.
Right. Yeah, and unclick that check cascade. I mean, if you don't want to lose your data and you put a lot of work into it, check it, move, and you can always go back to that screen and then check it again and then move so the calculations will happen. But you really don't. It's frustrating to lose data. It's frustrating to lose data, for sure.
Does the CEQA unit run the model or project manager?
So that's an internal question, right?
Yeah. The project managers are best acquainted with the project itself and everything that's involved with it. You are familiar with the plan itself or the permit at hand, so that would be within the project manager's responsibility to run that model. Also, if you have a consultant, which in most cases you do, working with you to develop the project plan or the permit, you could ask the consultant to run the model. The thing is to check the results when they come back, if you do choose to use a consultant, because you want to make sure that the information you're getting back is not odd or it doesn't make sense in the real world. So do check it.
He wants to know if anyone knows in CEQA knows how to run the model. It was supposed to be developed to be intuitive.
So I think the answer to that question is yes. Not to claim that any of us are experts, but we can
Play with it.
Yeah, we can run the model.
Yeah, that was Carolyn Yee speaking, who had run the model. And John Mearshite also following up with a comment.
I'll have to admit that we at the Air District are not experts in running the model either, because it's new to, I mean, it's still a fairly new model. The people that are the experts already are those consultants that are doing that for jurisdictions, because they're spending time with it and they're seeing what's going on with it and finding quirks and figuring out how to deal with it. So consultants are probably...
Another question. Does CEQA only apply to soil cleanup, not apply to groundwater cleanup, right?
I assume all.
Doesn't matter what avenue toxics are at.
If you're having a construction activity, I mean, if you're doing water cleanup and you're running generators or you're drilling injection wells,
right.
All of those emit pollution.
Yeah.
Right. So like on a like what you're saying, if you're building a plant to do the water cleanup, your emissions probably won't be significant to build it, but then you probably need permits to run it. And so if you know you have a drill rig, you could put a drill rig in these, but they probably won't be significant as far as the construction part. Now the operational might be.
Could you explain the hazardous waste cleanup exemption mentioned early in Ollie's presentation?
Yeah, we do have guidance on the Class 30 categorical exemptions. It's on our SharePoint site, and if you need help in locating it, just give one of our planners a call, and we'd be glad to walk you through that.
There was also a training session that was recorded.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's on our SharePoint site anymore. However, the guidance is there. And I won't get into all the details of it, but if you have a specific question for us, please give us a call or, submit an EnviroStar request if you think you need some detailed help on a specific project. And Kathy Schievelbein, our chief, will assign a planner to work with you.
Yeah.
And Mike was saying, is he talking about emergencies?
Oh, so this is for minor cleanup actions. If there's a remedial action work plan with a cost of less than $1 million.
Internal guidance discusses that in detail.
Is there another question?
Yeah, Michael just said, is he talking about emergencies?
Is there a different categorical exemption
Yes.
for emergency cleanup?
Yes, there
Is that one?
Yeah, for emergency projects, some slightly different criteria apply. Again, if you have an emergency project, fill out an EnviroStar request and send it to Kathy, and she'll assign a planner to work with you on your project. And you could, excuse me, I just wanted to say you can submit an EnviroStar request for just like maybe an hour or two of consultation, and we'll just discuss the project with you, review whatever your plan or permit is, and help get you on the right track in terms of what type of CEQA document is appropriate for what you plan to undertake.
I have another question. If I apply for CEQA exemption, I have to use the model to demonstrate air quality during the cleanup, right?
That is correct.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah. Even if you have an exemption, you still need to demonstrate by using the model that your air quality impacts are below the threshold.
And that should be within your project folder as support information.
Do the project managers or reviewers, do they get by jurisdiction, from the air quality district, do they get a statement from them for every project, or that, it's exempt, what basis it's exempt under or not?
Does the air quality district get that information?
No, I mean DTSC project managers, do they, for every project, do they go to the air district where that project is and get approval for every project, or how do they handle it?
they don't necessarily secure approval from the district itself, but what our project managers will do is take a look at the emissions that are being caused by the project activities and assess that against the air district rules.
Okay.
And for most of the districts, there's detailed information on their websites now, which is really helpful to our project managers.
Yeah, I have another question. After I generate the report, I should send a DTSC SQL unit or airport?
Well, again, by the time you're running the model,
Or send districts?
yeah, you should be working with one of our CEQA planners on the project itself to determine what type of CEQA document it is you need for the project. And if you're below the thresholds in terms of your calculations by using SMAQMD, then unless there's some peculiarity about your project, I don't think you'd need to necessarily contact the district if it's a small project that's less than significant. But always, of course, you'd want to discuss that with your planner and see whether or not there's some need to get the air district involved.
Yeah, even if you just have questions on something the model's doing, or if you want to say, oh, did we run this right? It can take up some of our time, but it's worth it, because if you ask us, then you're learning, and then you know how to do it, and then people in your staff will talk to you instead of calling the air district. So it doesn't hurt to call us if you have a question. We don't mind.
Because it is clear. Thank you. I think NOEs should be run by your supervisor first before going to SEQA.
Yes, if you had attended one of our SEQA process sessions earlier this year, we had one during the Director's Symposium that was called Introducing SEQA, and then we had one later in February that was SEQA Basics. And during both of those training sessions, we did discuss that the SEQA document does need to be approved by the branch chief before it comes to our office.
SharePoint?
The slides from the Director's Symposium and the slides from the SEQA Basics are on our DTSC SharePoint site under the training link. If you have any problems finding those, or you just need a little assistance navigating our SharePoint site, please just give one of our planners a call, and we'd be glad to walk you through it.
Another question. How do you address getting needed information from raw RAP when decision is due at proposed plan stage, for example, at military bases?
You have to have a plan that's at the stage where you have the information available to evaluate it for CEQA. If you don't have that information in the RAP raw, then you would need to push the consultant or the project proponent to get it to you, because of course without the data you can't do a proper CEQA evaluation.
Right, and with your guys' projects, they're not normal development projects, that these models are set up to analyze with the default, so it's good to ask for at least some project specific, even if it's, we probably use 10 excavators or something, just something, just a ballpark, and it's better to be conservative in your analysis, so you're overestimating, then you have some wiggle room.
For attending. And again, thank you, Ollie, and thank you, Karen, for your time this morning. We really value you having come here today to give us all the valuable information that you have.
Well, thanks for having us. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And thank you, Carolyn, who did our monitoring, and John for his questions and comments. And again, thank you, everyone, for attending today.